Alright, alright, we're doing this for real this time. This is the Reclaimer Book Club book report discussion of the Fall of Reach. We're going to be doing these every month, at the end of the month. Because every month we're going to read a book in the Halo universe. And while you don't have to read every book, the book club does, and you get to decide which books you want to read. The next book we're going to be rereading, obviously, is The Flood, so if you're interested in reading The Flood, then let me know on the Discord server. That'll be in the link in the description below. But without further ado, let's get into this, starting with the elephant in the room, the retcons, which, to my, off the top of my head, I noticed 2 retcons that were the most glaring. One being the Battle of Reach itself. The other being Cortana. Because in Halo Reach the game, it's implied that, the first time, anybody's ever seen Cortana is, Halo Reach. Which is, which is just weird. And is, but even though, Combat Evolved's dialogue makes it clear that, Cortana and Chief know each other. So the Fall of Reach, the book, would make more sense, in terms of how they portray that, which we'll get into that once we.
Well, in Halo Reach, it's the first time that Noble Team sees Cortana. Chief doesn't say anything. He's just an Easter egg in a cryotube. So
that's true. Yeah, but I don't know. It just seems weird, because. Yeah, but it just seems yeah, but what? That's the thing though. In the Fall of Reach, the book, Cortana was already with Chief because they were specifically doing their top secret mission to hijack a Covenant ship.
Yes, I can tell you what 343's explanation is, or I think it's Bungie, because they do try to reconcile the Fall of Reach with Halo Reach, but their attempts at reconciling or meshing the two source materials together is pretty poor, in my opinion, to say the least.
Yeah, it's pretty poor. I mean, judging by the fact that they were like, oh wait, somebody already told the story. Well, fuck off. We're gonna write the story and we're gonna do it our way because we're Bungie. We're so cool. Which, yeah, that does seem to be their mentality, but it was just fine. I guess, I just wish that, okay, the thing that I think is fucking stupid is the fact that the Covenant had been on Reach for, a month at a, that they had, all this time to set up all these, defenses and all this bullshit. It's
yeah, that's the explanation that Bungie gives or whatever, is that the Covenant had been there for 2 weeks or something, and the UNSC was somehow able to keep it a secret, the Covenant being on Reach for 2 weeks somehow. I don't know how.
Why didn't they even know?
I don't know why the Covenant are never shown being this stealthy ever again, both in the games and in the books, so I don't know how they're able to land fucking CAS class assault carriers and shit just undetected, but whatever.
Who knows?
But yeah, that's the explanation they give, is the fact the Covenant were just hiding out, and the reason why Chief and the other Spartans or whatever didn't know about it is because, like I said, the UNSC was keeping it a secret for some reason.
It just doesn't make any sense.
Nope. No, it does not.
Actually, speaking of another thing that didn't make sense, is specifically because I thought that the reason why because my first time reading the book, I remember thinking, oh, it's because Ensign Lebel forgot to initiate Cold Protocol during Sigma Octavis 4 that the Covenant found Reach.
Nope,
But
that
no.
has nothing to do with it. It has
Yeah, I know, it's
little
that
probe.
fucking stupid. Yeah, it's the stupid probe. That's dumb.
And to be fair, I just reread it. I think it's the probe, and then I think in addition it's also the coordinates that the Cortana is able to get, or that I think it's Halsey is able to get from the stone from Sigma Octanus 4. The coordinates point to 2 places. It points to Reach, and it points to Installation 04 in the first Halo game.
Okay.
So I think that's another way they get the coordinates, the Covenant, that is.
Okay. That's makes a little bit more sense. Yeah, because the stone is like a Forerunner thing.
Mm-hmm. And there's
'Cause
obviously Forerunner ruins on Reach, so.
yeah,
But anyway, before we start talking about the retcons, do you want to talk about, like, give a brief summary of the actual book?
sure. Basically, the Fall of Reach covers. Well, it starts off by covering like the origins of the Spartan 2 program, and you see John as as he becomes the Master Chief, like. Which I always thought I always like think it's funny in the books that they're calling him the Master Chief. The Master Chief. It's like the Master Chief Petty Officer is a rank. It's not a title that he has. It's like it's just fucking silly. But
There's
anyway.
only one. There's only the Master Chief.
The only Master Chief is Master Chief Petty Officer John 117. Which and yes, okay, but yes, I digress. The other part of the book is the origins of the Human Covenant War. And obviously the book at the end of the book covers the fall of Reach and how that happens, which leads into the events of Combat Evolved.
Yep, directly.
Yeah.
And fun fact that most people don't know about, but the Fall of Reach actually came out about, I think I want to say about a month before before Combat Evolved actually did. So the
Interesting.
book came out before the game.
I'll have to look that. Let's see. Halo, the Fall of Reach, novel by Eric. Let's see. October 30th, 2001. Yes, that is a month before.
Yep, CE was released November 15th, and the novel was released October 30th, so about 2 weeks, actually.
So yeah, that's interesting. Like that's pretty ballsy though to write a novel like before and to have it like a tie-in novel before your game comes out. Like I think that says a lot about like it's funny because I feel like a lot of like the cinematic universe movies, like the Dark Universe. You remember like that Mummy movie, like that was like, oh yeah, we're gonna start like this like there's gonna be a cinematic universe of like the classic like Universal monsters, and it's like nobody gave a shit about it, so the whole project just died.
Yeah, they wrote a book for like for all they knew for a game that was gonna flop or not even succeed. So
Yeah, because Bungie didn't even think, ah, yeah, nobody's gonna buy like an Xbox, and nobody's gonna like play Halo. And Microsoft is like, I think like Microsoft even was like, oh yeah, this Halo is gonna be like cool, but have you seen this game? Like they were like bragging about all these other games that they had to Bungie,
yep.
which is funny.
Anyway, the in-depth summary which I have written down is book opens up with basically a flashback, or I guess a flash forward, depending on how you want to phrase it. The book jumps around in time a couple points.
Yeah.
I guess it's a flashback then to Jericho 7, and that basically just introduces the Spartans as a concept. They distract a bunch of grunts while Red Team blows up a Covenant ship with a nuke, and then they get to watch the planet be glassed from orbit, because it establishes no matter how well the Spartans or the UNSC does on the ground, they get their asses kicked in orbit and always end up losing. The book then flashbacks even further to Halsey and Keyes traveling to Eridanus 2, I believe, to scout
Yes.
out John, who's currently beating the shit out of a bunch of other kids in King of the Hill.
Yes.
Yep. And the scene establishes, or begins to establish, John, and more specifically his luck, and the fact he makes his own luck.
Which
Uh,
we'll get to that in a bit. You
mm,
carry on.
it's because it's a bunch of points I have.
Mm-hmm.
After that, it goes to Reach, Halsey giving the initial introduction speech to the 75 children that have been kidnapped and basically brought into the Spartan 2 program. and then it goes over what the first couple of days of training looks like for John and the rest of the Spartans. He learns to get together and work with initially what is Blue Team, which comprises of just him, Kelly, and Sam. Uh, the Fall of Reach, the animated series, it retcons a bunch of shit, and people always think Blue Team has always been Fred, Kelly, Linda, and John, but it was actually initially just John, Sam, and Kelly. Fred
Yeah,
and Linda weren't in it
Linda was originally part of Green Team.
initially, yeah,
Yeah,
until
then
until Fred or not Fred, until Sam died, I think, and then Fred and Linda were made part of Blue Team, I
no,
believe.
Linda was like Green Leader. I think it was like during the Battle of Reach she was transferred to Blue Team.
Oh right, yeah, in orbit, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Anyway,
There was also Spartan what was it? Spartan James, who was, I think that was his name? Or no. Fuck, which one am I thinking of?
James was in charge of Red Team during Sigma Octanus. I think
Yes,
is who you're
he's
thinking
the
of.
one who lost his arm.
Or wait, is he the one that lost his arm? If he's the one who's lost his arm, that's never. Yeah, he also was part of Blue Team in the orbital mission. He was actually he was part of Blue Team, I think, as well during
Yeah,
Sigma Octanus.
I think he's one of the few Spartans you can actually say he was MIA.
Oh yeah, because he just went flying off into outer space. Yeah.
And you never saw him again.
Yeah.
Every other time it probably is just actually KIA, but like that you, oh, you just, you know what? We're just gonna cover this in black ink and just push this under the rug as if nothing happened.
Yeah, he probably died, but we're getting ahead of ourselves.
Yes.
Anyway, after we see Blue Team, the beginning of Blue Team and the Spartan 2 training, and most importantly, John learning to actually work together as a team, because before that, he was just concerned with himself winning, and Mendez made it clear to him that you don't win unless your team wins. And
Yes.
that kind of stuck with John. Next is it's another Spartan 2 training flashback, but this time they're going on a training mission to the mountains in Reach. Basically, each child gets a fragment of a map. They have to put the map together and then get to the extraction point, with the caveat being that the last child on the dropship gets left behind. John says, fuck that. And this is basically the mission where they kind of hijack the transport and beat the shit out of the guys guarding it because they
Mhm.
weren't in uniform. And this is where John gets promoted to squad leader and also is kind of recognized by all the other Spartans as kind of like the de facto leader.
This is kind of like
Um,
the Alpha Spartan.
hmm Yeah, basically. After this, we cut to what is it? I think it's 6 to 8 years later when they're 14, and we get it from Halsey's perspective when they're undergoing the Spartan 2 augmentations. We don't actually see it done. It's basically like the lead up to it, but we hear about what the procedures are and what they do, not in detail, but enough to give us an idea of how terrible they are.
Yes, to establish that Dr. Halsey is a war criminal. Like that's enough. That's all the detail we get. We establish just enough to detail to establish, yes, this woman has committed war crimes, but she's a
True.
sweetheart, so it's okay, sort of.
Well,
The
she views it as a necessary evil, basically, and even then, she wanted to, as Deja points out in the chapter, Halsey wanted to delay the augmentation for a couple more years until safer technology was available, that uh, wouldn't result in horrible disfigurement or death. But Deja pointed out that if she were to wait a couple years, that Oni Section 3, which is basically her bosses, just think of Oni basically as space CIA, they would
very
bring in
accurate.
yeah, they would bring in somebody else who probably would give less of a shit about the kids and would probably push through augmentation anyway. And that Deja convinces Halsey basically to go ahead with it. Um,
Mhm.
After that, we get a scene with John in the light carrier Atlas, where the Spartan 2s are the surviving ones, I should say, are recovering from the augmentation procedures. We learned out that, or we learned that basically only a little over a third of them survived, a third of them died, and then almost a third of them basically were so horribly crippled or disfigured that they can no longer be Spartans. Uh, We hear about some of the side effects of the augmentation: bleeding eyes, migraines, people being clumsy and falling down, basically just trying to relearn how to control their bodies. And then we get to the first real demonstration of what a Spartan 2 can do, which is in the fight scene in the gym, which in the animated Fall of Reach is the thing I single-handedly hate the most, because it fucks so much with how it was portrayed in the book versus how it was portrayed in the animation.
Yeah.
In the book, all John is basically trying to do is defend himself until he's ordered into the ring by the sergeant, and even then, he just thinks he's just going to incapacitate them. And the fight lasts
But
about.
he does it like thinking like, oh, like not. I don't think he's like he does it while still not fully realizing
He
how
doesn't realize how
dangerous.
strong he is, and
Yes.
he doesn't most importantly, he doesn't realize how strong he is, and he's not trying to kill them. He's just trying to incapacitate them or knock them out.
Mhm.
The fight lasts 5 seconds, and out of the 5 ODSTs, he accidentally kills 2 of them and horribly cripples the other 3 in under 5 seconds. Um, so yeah, Mendez comes in, orders John to stand down. He walks out of the room. He feels guilty about it, and he has regrets about it, but ultimately he puts it off as him basically doing what he was ordered to do, and that's a theme that you'll see a lot through the
That's
book.
that's where we get the distinction between spending lives and wasting lives.
Yeah. I was gonna say, throughout the book, it's made of, and throughout all the books, really, you see John basically wrestling with his conscience in terms of him trying to decide what is right to do, what he views as morally right, while at
Mhm.
the same time trying to struggle with basically his military indoctrination or upbringing, in terms of following orders, following the chain of command, and always getting the job done. So,
Yes.
yeah. And that's something that's brought up multiple times throughout the novels. Anyway, I'll hurry up a bit because I'm probably taking too long on the
That's
fucking summary. But anyway, after that, Halsey goes to Reach. We see a demonstration of what the Spartans can do in the underground mine. Mendez points out the day they got back, the Spartans once again accidentally killed 3 trainers in hand-to-hand combat unintentionally. And so they basically put them down in this mine and gave the trainers all giant exoskeletons to
Oh
protect
yeah, the
themselves.
Mjolnir Mark 1.
Yeah. John kicks one and it goes flying about 30 feet, and I'm sure the Mjolnir Mark 1 weighs about 1,000 pounds, so that's impressive.
Probably weighs more than the actual like the Mjolnir like Mark 4,
Oh yeah,
considering it's much bulkier.
yeah. Mark 4 weighs like 750 or half a ton or something, and
Yeah.
this probably weighs like a ton. But
Yeah.
we see their capabilities. Then they go on a mission to capture a rebel colonel, Colonel Watts, from a rebel base in an asteroid in the Eridanus system.
Yep.
They succeed at that. Uh, Accidentally kill some civilians, which once again John feels bad about, but mission is complete, so he has to reconcile with that. And he also gets a Purple Heart during this mission when he takes a bullet in the side.
Yeah.
After that, the Spartans all convene back on Reach, and this is where the threat of the Covenant is introduced. Harvest being glassed, and Admiral Cole assembling a fleet to go fight them. Because of the Covenant being introduced, Project Mjolnir is basically accelerated to its final phase, and the Spartans are ferried to where it's being stored at Kai Seti 4. On the way there, they run into a Covenant ship. Their ship gets really badly damaged, but they manage to basically fend it off for a little while. They get the Mark IV Mjolnir at Kai Seti, and then in order to save the ship they basically came in on getting destroyed by the Covenant ship, they, in the Mjolnir armor, infiltrate the Covenant ship and blow it up from the inside. But in the process, Sam takes a bunch of plasma rounds to the side. His suit gets breached. He can't go back into space, obviously, because he'd die from decompression. And so he ends up staying behind to cover the bomb while Chief and Kelly retreat. And that's the first Spartan death in the war.
Hmm. Which
Um,
the fact that it happens pretty early on in the war is probably pretty bad for just like that should tell you how dangerous the Covenant are. That the
Yeah,
most cutting edge like super soldier technology that the UNSC can throw out the Covenant, you still lose one guy.
yeah. Mainly because they didn't know what they were dealing with. People forget. Like they'll play Halo CE and play the rest of the Halo games and be like, "Oh, fucking energy shields and shit." What they
Mhm.
forget is that for 25 years, Chief and the other Spartans fought without energy shields, so all they had to rely on was being able to take a couple hits, and so they had to rely on more on speed, tactics, and basically just outguiling the Covenant where they could. They couldn't rely on just going in there brute force like you can in the Halo games with the energy shields. But
Yeah.
anyway, yeah, Sam dies, and then we flash forward many years later. I think about 15 years later to a battle at Sigma Octanus 4. Here we get reintroduced to Captain Keyes, who we last saw in the prologue with Halsey scouting out John.
Last time we saw him, he was Lieutenant Keyes. Now he's Commander
Now he's
Keyes.
commander, right, and he won't get promoted to captain until after this battle.
Hmm.
But he's in command of the Iroquois, which is a UNSC destroyer,
A Hailbird
um,
class.
halberd class. Yeah.
I had to look
Uh,
that up because that was bothering me.
what just type of destroyer it was? Yeah, fair
Yes,
enough.
uh,
Yeah. Anyway,
which
no, go
when I was reading that, like, after playing Sins of the Prophets, and like after
ahead.
once I like the first time I just like knew like, okay, the four Covenant ships, that was bad, but the second time after playing Sins of the Prophets and hearing it's like, no, it wasn't four like frigates, it was like two frigates, a destroyer, and a carrier, and I'm like hearing, oh god, a carrier. Okay, it was nice knowing you.
Yeah, I don't think
uh
they actually engage the carrier. I think the carrier actually retreats. But Keyes does manage to take out two, what do you call it? Two frigates and a destroyer, which is still fucking mighty impressive.
yeah, with the
Because he
keys
says
loop.
it could, those two ships could take out like a dozen or 2 dozen UNSC ships. But anyway, Keyes, Keyes basically he alerts the fleet that hey, the Covenant are invading, and then he proceeds to take out the frigates and the destroyer basically by he how do I describe it? He shoots a nuke basically in the opposite direction
He
that he
shoots
is
it, like,
going.
kind of gets it so it will, like, I think it basically so it goes around in the orbit of the planet.
Yeah, basically he does it so it doesn't like it doesn't fucking actually head towards them. It kind of like goes off in an opposite direction so the Covenant ignore it initially. Then he gets the two frigates' attention. He shoots them both once with a Mac gun, which takes down their shields. He then gets the frigates to shoot at them. He dodges their plasma fire using the emergency thrusters, like on the ship.
Mhm.
He goes and he almost ends up ramming the Covenant destroyer,
Like, they
but he,
scrape right against each other, basically trading paint.
yeah, he scrapes over the Covenant destroyer with the idea that the two Covenant plasma torpedoes from the frigates following him are going, like, they can't adjust course quick enough, and so they hit the destroyer. They end up almost killing the destroyer, which what do you call it? Keyes finishes off with a bunch of Archer missiles,
Mhm.
and then the two frigates that were chasing him, now that their shields are down, he basically commands the nuke he had that was just sitting off in space to blow up, and the frigates, like their momentum or whatever, carried them right over the nuke, and so they got destroyed too. So in the course of 5 minutes, a single UNSC destroyer takes out two Covenant frigates and a Covenant destroyer, and then the carrier retreats.
He's like, "Oh, fuck this shit, I'm out."
Basically, yeah.
Which
Um,
I will say, first and second time reading like the book, like I would say that this whole bit on Sigma Octavius, the whole keys loop, is probably the most entertaining part of the book.
oh yeah, Sigma Octanus as a whole is just very entertaining. The
Mm,
arc, and it also takes up like the middle half of the book, basically.
yeah.
Um, but anyway, the carrier retreats, but Keyes realized the carrier dropped off a bunch of drop ships and like support craft and shit, and that the like ground side they're invading Sigma Octanus 4, and more specifically Côte d'Azur, which is a city on Sigma
Yeah.
Octanus. So he alerts the fleet. A bunch of UNSC ships show up in orbit. Then we cut from Keys and the UNSC fleet in orbit to the ground, where it goes from Corporal Harland, which is a Marine who was lucky enough to survive with his couple troops out on a scouting mission. They call for reinforcements. They see there's a funny scene where they see one Pelican coming down, and they think
Oh,
that they're basically just sending them like a burial detail, when in reality it's
yeah.
blue, red, and green team, like
I,
basically all the Spartan 2s.
I really enjoyed that. I was like, oh yeah, like that was pretty good and clever.
Yeah. Anyway, I'm gonna go faster because then we can talk about like favorite scenes from the book.
Oh
Uh,
yeah, I
Spart-
mean,
Spartan
yeah.
2s, they go to Côte d'Azur. They rescue a bunch of civilians. They blow it up with a nuke eventually, and then before they blow it up with a nuke, they discovered this rock that seemingly the Covenant invaded and lost all these ships in orbit for. Is this one rock, and they recover it. Has a bunch of weird glyphs and translations and shit on it that they don't know what it means. And it's basically that kind of sets up like a mystery of what the hell this rock is, and like since the glyph isn't Covenant, is it another alien race? While that's going on, they have a big fleet battle up in space. Big repair station gets used as basically a mobile shield, and the
The
UNSC win the space battle. They
yeah, the
destroy all the Covenant
cradle.
ships. Yeah, the Cradle. They destroy all the Covenant ships, but they lose once again about half to 2/3 of their fleet in the process. But they win. So they
Yeah.
win and they recover the magic space rock. So it's a victory in their books, but kind of a Pyrrhic victory. Um, After that, then we cut to basically the last third of the book. We get introduced to Cortana. Get introduced to Halsey. Chief gets debriefed by Oni and shit about the events that happened on Octanus. And then finally, we get a cool little scene, or cool little series of scenes where Chief is introduced to Cortana. We find out that Colonel Ackerson's a giant douchebag. He tries to kill Chief in the Cortana when Chief is testing out the new Mark V Mjolnir armor, which has energy shielding. It's the armor you use in Halo CE, so that's where that comes from. They test it out. They have a grand old time. Almost die, but they win. Covenant show up on then we get introduced. The reason they're getting this armor is because the UNSC realizes they're losing, and they're probably going to lose in a couple months to a year. So they devise a plan to basically capture a Covenant ship, fly it to their homeworld, capture some of their leaders, and then bring them back so they can negotiate a peace treaty, which is fucking insane. And even John realizes that's insane.
Yes.
But you know,
Especially knowing like in hindsight a lot of the lore, like um you do realize that these aliens only care about activating Halo. And you're like, maybe it would have been a good idea, because then the UNSC is like, oh yeah, sure, we'll help you find a Halo or whatever. It's like, activate the Great Journey. It's like, oh wait, that kills everybody. Fuck. Also, considering the fact that there is no real Covenant homeworld, that their capital per
is
se
High
is,
Charity. It's
yes,
basically mobile. That's why they never found it.
yeah.
And also later on, I think it's either in First Strike. I think it's at the end of First Strike, which I'm rereading right now. It describes High Charity as basically like having so many defenses and so many weapons that if a ship shows up or whatever and gets within like millions or millions or millions of kilometers with it without like immediately transmitting the right codes or whatever, it's just instantly blown up, no questions asked. So yeah, that probably wouldn't have gone over very well
Yeah.
if they did go off on it.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, so that's the mission that they're given. We're introduced to the Pillar of Autumn, which is the ship that they're going to be using to try to complete this mission. It's a modified Halcyon class cruiser, and the Halcyons are basically old, outdated pieces of shit, which the only reason they're notable is because of how tough and basically indestructible they were. So they chose that. And they have Keys being the captain because he's a fucking smart dude. Ship would disable a Covenant ship. Basically, Spartans would board it, capture it, and do all that good stuff. But before any of that can happen, the Covenant show up at Reach and basically initiate an orbital battle over it with the UNSC fleet. The fleet, and more specifically the big orbital defense platforms, the big MAC guns orbiting Reach, are able to take out a little over half of the Covenant fleet, but the Covenant fleet are able to deploy a bunch of dropships once again, like at Sigma Octanus, to the ground of Reach to take out the big generators that power the orbital defense platforms. And at the same time this is happening, we learn also that there is a unregistered ship on a space station near Reach, that its navigation database is intact, and the Covenant are basically trying to capture it so they can figure out the location of Earth. So Chief basically splits up his team. He takes 3 to 4 people. He takes Linda and James and him. They go to the space station to secure and destroy the navigation database, and he sends the other 30-ish Spartans down to Reach to defend the orbital defense platforms. On the mission to the space station, James gets blasted off into space. We don't see him again. Linda fucking takes a bunch of plasma rounds and needlers to the back of the head and like the back of her or whatever, and she's basically killed. He brings her back to the Pillar of Autumn and has her frozen, with the hopes that they can basically revive her once they get her to a medical facility.
Yeah, because it said she was like clinically dead, which
yeah,
scientifically, which means basically that's when your heartbeat stops, and with like basically you have like just around like 4 minutes to either either get your heartbeat back up or your brain starts suffering irreversible damage.
2 minutes actually, yeah, but I don't know how long it is for Spartans. I'm sure it's a little longer or something like that.
Possibly.
Yeah, but anyway, they freeze her, and Chief initially wants to go back to retrieve the rest of his team he deployed to Reach. However, they get a scrambled communication from the ground that basically says they're getting overrun and they have to use the nukes to basically destroy the Covenant. The orbital defense platforms get taken out, the rest of the UNSC fleet gets wiped out, a bunch more Covenant ships show up, and they begin glassing the planet. Chief is forced to leave the rest of his team behind. Linda's clinically dead, so for all he knows, that makes him the last Spartan. And they go and fly off at seemingly a random destination per the Cole Protocol. However, Cortana actually translated or figured out that the weird symbols and glyphs on the rock at Sigma Octanus, like they weren't actually a language, it was actually math, and it was actually a star chart. And so she calculates a course basically to where the star chart points her to. And the epilogue, the end of the book, is Cortana and Keyes. It's basically the opening to see them arriving at Halo and being like, what the hell is that? Is the
Cortana, all we need to know is, did we lose them?
Yeah. But anyway, a bunch of shit happens in the book. Important things being, like you said, it sets up the Spartan 2s, it sets up the beginning of the Human Covenant War, it sets up Chief as the central protagonist, or one of the central protagonists, and then it also sets up the fall of Reach and the events that lead into the first Halo game. And those are all the important events, basically, covered in the book.
Yes. Which... Now, one of the things I wanted to say earlier, you mentioned the coin toss little thing. I feel like just the way that was handled in the book is just like he just like catches it in the air. Like he doesn't like, because in the animated film, like they do it like a bunch of times, and it's like,
yes, and he just keeps guessing the correct thing or whatever.
Which is not which I don't know. Him catching it in the air is like you said he makes his own luck, but I see it as more just like he not only that, but also he's like determined to win the game by any means, and he's like willing to think outside the box.
Basically, yeah.
Which is kind of necessary to like both like play the Halo games like properly, as you need to think outside the box in terms of like weapon sandbox, but also just in general in the lore, considering the fact that the Covenant are superior in technology in basically almost every single way, with the exception of possibly artificial intelligence, because the Covenant really don't have those.
And also math, evidently, too. They really suck at math.
I blame the prophets for that. It's like, oh, what is this? Math and science? No, we just worship the great journey. Like,
Yeah, as they explain in First Strike, which, like I said, is the book I'm rereading right now, the Covenant are imitative rather than innovative. All they do is they find old Forerunner shit and they basically just fucking copy or whatever it is. It's kind of like the Mechanicus from 40K. They fucking they'll bring the technology on board and they'll revere it or whatever. They'll study it to some degree, but at the same time, it's very limited by their religion. And they use the technology, but they use it without understanding how the technology actually works, and that's a big point against the Covenant. So
yeah,
yeah.
they're not really creative.
No, because the minute in First Strike, the minute Cortana captures a Covenant ship, she, like I said, looks at the mathematics or whatever they were using to like power the weapons, and she's like, "This is fucking garbage," and then immediately devises a much better system that I think she uses to instantly destroy like 5 Covenant frigates or something like that. But yeah, yeah. Anyway, so coin flip, yeah, that's a good scene. Shows him making his own luck and shit. Do you want to talk about like favorite scenes from the book for you?
Yeah, I said the Keys loop is probably my personal favorite. Simply 'cause I love Captain Keys in the lore. Like in the game, he's just kind of like, "Oh yes, Cortana, I'm here in this story." It's like, "Chief, I'm giving you a gun, and then I die." Like that's basically Keys' character in the game, but in the books, like he's just a total Chad. I love
Hmm.
Captain Keys. He's great. He's
He's
entertaining.
he's a very by the books military procedure type of guy, but at the same time he's willing to bend. He's good at keeping a secret, and he's willing to. Him and Chief are actually very similar. They're both very strict by the book military types of dudes, but at the same time they have a sense of what's right and what's wrong, and they're willing to go and bend the rules in order to follow their conscience basically
Not only that, but also just to win. Like,
to win as well. Yeah,
yeah, like to ensure their own victory. Cause yeah, both Chief and both Keys are willing to like do things that are very unconventional in
exactly.
terms of
Yeah.
I think once like that's I think why I love the whole thing like where it's like Chief or where John I should say because this is before he was like promoted where John needs to learn like the value of teammate because he's like ha I win because children will be like that it's like and anyway like no like Chief Petty Officer Mendez is like no you don't win John you have to your whole team has to win and I think when like John learns that lesson he thinks well I need to make sure that we all win together as one group
Hmm.
rather than competing against each other like as we see in the one forest mission.
And they come in. His team comes in because John was first or whatever out of everybody last time, but then this time his team comes in third, but his entire team finishes. And it's
Yeah.
not just him. And
React and
it's
they actually like work together and coordinate and actually have a plan in that
yeah.
scene as well,
And it's
which is
funny as he says Mendez doesn't show very much emotion in the book, but he shows emotion a couple times, and this is one of them where he says he has a faint smirk on his face.
yeah.
Anyway, any other favorite scenes you got in the
Let's
book?
see. Oh, you mentioned the one where you also had the one where yeah, I really like the Marines, like where it's like, oh fuck, we're screwed. And it's just like, oh wait, the Spartans. I also thought it was kind of interesting in general. Like Sigma Octavius 4 has a lot of interesting stuff because I like how
Hmm.
they're like in the museum and they're like it's kind of interesting to think like what natural science would be like in the future, where like you have like not just like Earth natural history,
But
but
natural history
also
from other planets and stuff. Yeah,
yeah, like that seems kind of interesting, and it's a shame that like a lot of that like natural history and stuff like is lost to time is now lost because like they got nuked, but eh, can't really
can't really
complain.
help it.
Yeah, it's not that important, but I
It
also
it.
just think it's interesting just like how the hunters are introduced,
Mhm.
where they're like it just basically, like, the first time you see the hunter, well, you don't actually see it. You just
You
see,
just
like,
see
the
a
corpse of,
silhouette.
well, no, you see the corpse of a jackal that just got crushed.
Yeah,
And then you later figure, like, Chief later figures out, oh, the hunter basically just stepped on it, just like, it's in my way. It's like not even
not
caring
even
that.
caring.
Yeah, which
Yeah.
definitely does kind of highlight the difference between the Covenant and the UNSC. And basically, it almost seems like the Covenant is basically the antithesis of what John has been trained to be, which is you care for your unit and you make sure people get as many people come out alive as possible. Where Covenant are basically like, whatever, we're just gonna throw mindless cannon fodder at it because we don't care. We just want to win.
Yeah,
And
both the UNSC and the Covenant work towards a higher objective, basically, but the way they go about achieving that objective are in very different methods. The UNSC and the Spartans try to preserve every life that they can to win, while the Covenant have the numbers and the superiority to essentially throw it aside and speak of the losses as in because it's a religious theocracy basically of they will be remembered in the great journey and they will still be with us or whatever
yeah,
in our journey. So the
which
losses we suffer now won't matter when we're all gods.
I will say that that's one of the things I like about the Covenant religion over like the Warhammer 40K religion is that there's like actually an afterlife, and that there's like actually like a reason why people would like actually give it hope, instead of, it's like, things suck, but they could be worse. They would be worse if we didn't have the Emperor, if we didn't worship the Emperor. And I feel like that's the one thing that kind of falls apart in terms of the Imperium. It's like there's no like afterlife, there's no like
Well, the 40K does
paradise.
have an afterlife in terms of the warp, but like 40K, the warp, the afterlife also sucks ass. So really, nothing in it is good. You live your shitty ass life in the Imperium, then you go to the warp or whatever, your soul, your spirit goes to the warp, and you live a shitty life in the warp until you're reincarnated or something back into the shitty world, and then you
Yeah.
repeat the shitty cycle all over again.
Which Warhammer, I mean, to be fair, that is kind of what Warhammer is supposed to be. It's like everything is shitty, and it's like comedically shitty.
Everything is comedically shitty, and everything is shitty almost out of necessity because of the scale of the enemies they're fighting and also the sheer size of the galaxy that they're operating on. But
And
anyway, we're
that's,
not
yeah, we're not here to talk about Warhammer
Warhammer
40K.
40K.
We could talk about that some other time, but yes.
Yeah.
Actually, maybe, who knows, for the Reclaimer Book Club, once we run out of Halo books, we could start reading Warhammer books.
That'll be
Yeah,
interesting.
yeah, it'll be interesting to run out of Halo books. That'll be I mean, unless we just say fuck it and we decide not to read the garbage books. Also, you're pretty far ahead of not just me, but in terms of like the book club in general. So
I've
after,
already read all the fucking books. I'm just rereading them now.
yeah, it's true. So you that probably, yeah, I know. Anyway, but was so after Shadows of, or Ghost of Onyx, which book should we read next after that book? It's
Uh, After if we're doing it in order where we do like Fall of Reach, then Flood, then First Strike, then Ghost of Onyx, it kind of gets fuzzy after that because there's a bunch of standalone books and books that don't really tie into a trilogy, unlike the first four books.
Mhm.
I'd recommend going back and before we get to all the post Covenant War shit, which is fucking stupid. Before we do all that stuff, I recommend we go back and read some of the older ones, namely Contact Harvest and the Coal Protocol, because both of those are very excellent standalone books,
Okay,
especially Contact Harvest.
so we'll read those. I think
Yeah.
Contact Harvest is like the first, like, I think like that's the book about Sergeant Johnson, basically.
Yeah, it gives us Sergeant Johnson's backstory, it gives us his perspective, and then also importantly, it gives us a more detailed overview of how exactly the Human Covenant War began. Because Fall of Reach was basically just, oh, hey, Covenant showed up at Harvest, glassed it, we're now at war with them. Where it was a lot more, there was a lot more moving parts than that.
Hmm.
Hell, initially the Covenant and the humans initially weren't actually, well, I say weren't actually, but they weren't actually at war with each other. Um, in fact, they were going to have like a meeting or whatever to discuss shit. And fun fact, the first human casualty of the Human Covenant War was actually due to an engineer beating somebody to death with a fire extinguisher. So, first death was due to the non-violent passive engineer species, and I just find that funny. Anyway, but yeah, much more shit going on, and then the Cole Protocol basically gives us an idea of, because between the battle at Kai Ceti 4 where they destroyed the Covenant ship and then Sigma Octanus 4, there's like an 18 or 20 year time skip where we don't actually know what happens during those 20 years. The Cole Protocol kind of fills us in on some of the events that happened in that time. So,
I was gonna say,
namely Admiral Cole and his fight in the Outer Colonies.
yes, which is obviously where the name Cole Protocol comes from.
Yeah.
Which, yeah, which honestly, I thought, like, because they were making such a big deal of that, I thought, like, originally when I read the book that um that what was I gonna say? When I thought, like, that it was because, like, oh, Ensign Level was like, oh, it's just a strange anomaly. I'll just record it and it's nothing big deal. But no, that had no consequences, even though there were Covenant technically. It's just like we were not prepared because we didn't know what this thing in slip space was. Which, I'd say that, like, once you, like, read the book, like, and you're kind of understand how slip space works, that it's like, it's actually kind of interesting. And I think, like, the concept of slip space, of it being like kind of like this, like, alternate reality
Yeah.
where the laws of physics are basically like basically time is irrelevant. So you can
Time
basically,
is irrelevant, space is irrelevant, positioning is irrelevant.
yeah, so you
Light is
basically,
irrelevant. Most physics we know of are irrelevant.
yeah, basically, yeah, it does kind of create, it does kind of like, I feel like it's like better than like the typical, oh yes, faster than light travel. It is because it actually is more logical, because even like traveling at the speed of light, you are still limited to the speed of light, and the speed of light can only go so fast. Like, and then you have to deal with, like, Einstein's theory of relativity, where the faster you're going, like, the more,
The slower time is relative compared to the rest of the universe and all that
yes.
bullshit.
So basically, if you're going, like, faster than the speed of light, basically you might, like, experience like this, like, going like this might be like what, like a a journey that will probably take you like about a week will, like, in reality it's probably like 10 years.
Yeah, Halsey does a good job of explaining it in the book After the Flood, First Strike. She
Yeah.
says, like, the classic idea of FTL, like, for example, making a wormhole, that's the one that everybody thinks about, is you take a sheet of paper, you put one point on one end of the paper, you put a point of paper on the other end, and then you fold the paper in half so the 2 points basically, like, they're touching each other. It's instantaneous travel. She
Mhm.
describes it instead as, take that piece of paper, put 2 points on either end, and then crumple it up into a very small, tight ball. It's still, the 2 points are still very much closer to each other in this small, tight ball than they were when they were spaced apart. But at the same time, there's all this other shit that's in the way, all these other layers of space and dimensions and shit that are in the way. It's like
Yeah.
a ball of spaghetti or a ball of yarn, kind of.
Yes. Basically.
Yeah.
Which, let's see. Other Any other, like, discrepancies from the Fall of Reach the movie and Halo Reach the game that you want to talk about?
Uh, well, we're not going to talk about the movie because the movie fucks up so much shit that it greatly pisses me off. But the Fall of Reach, the game, the only things that Fall of Reach contradict are the later events, like the last third of the book that actually deal with the Fall of Reach. The other 2/3 of the book that come beforehand aren't, as far as I know, they aren't contradicted or hurt in any way. But the things that the book contradicts the game on is, one, in the book, we have the impression, or we're shown, that the Covenant basically show up at the outer edge of the system. They're detected by the sensor station or whatever, and that's how they know that the Covenant are coming to invade Reach. In the game, the Covenant somehow infiltrated their way onto Reach, and they're there for like a week or something, setting up defenses and stuff. I guess so they can take the Forerunner artifacts there. And the UNSC just find out about it, and once again, they're somehow able to suppress information on the Covenant being there for a week or two, until like the cat basically comes out of the bag, and they learn that they're on Reach.
Which
It's
is
kind of like an early it's like an early scouting party, I guess, or an early combat party in the game where what's it called? In the game, in the level where you go into space and George sacrifices himself to take out the CAS assault carrier. I think when all the other Covenant ships jump in or show up in the like in system or whatever right after that, I think that is where the Covenant fleet shows up in the book. I think.
you
Don't quote me
think.
on that. Yeah, don't quote me on that, but I think that's where it occurs.
So that, I guess you could say, I think the main problem with like the Covenant kind of just being like, oh yeah, we're just chilling for like about a month. You say it's about a week. I feel like I remember it being closer to a month, like in the game. But it's just
It's yeah, it's about 2 weeks, I think, in total time they're there.
it's just like, yeah, we're just chilling, fucking around.
Setting up
Like that's
defenses or some shit. I don't know.
that's not what the Covenant like have been like that is not what the Covenant do. They just are like not only does that contradict how the Covenant like portray in lore, but they do the exact same shit that they do like in the Fall of Reach in Halo 2, where they're like, yeah, we just show up and we just start fucking shit up. I mean, they do it poorly because they're like, wait, the fuck, what? Hold up, holy fuck, there are
In
actual humans here.
in the book, it's described as the Covenant because obviously their goal is genocide or whatever. The Covenant, once they beat the fleet in orbit, they don't really give a fuck what happens to the planet. Like they're not going to sit there and spend their time deploying occupation forces to individually hunt down the humans and like take control of the planet. They don't do that because that's a waste of time. If there's no Forerunner relics on the planet or there's no artifacts that they want to acquire, they will just happily sit in orbit and just glass the entire planet and then just move on. Like they're not interested in ground forces. The only time they do deploy ground forces is if there's something on the planet that they want or the planet is like strategically important to them, like it's located in an important sector of space or has important like mineral resources they want. That's the only time they'll deploy ground forces. So in Reach, in the book, in the Fall of Reach, the book, it's shown that the only artifact they care about is under Castle Base, while in the game it's more implied that there's like more artifacts over Reach that they care about, like the one under Sword Base as well. And so that's why they're deploying ground forces, is
I
to
ca-
basically remove the humans from the planet so they can go and grab them.
when I was first reading, when I first read the book, I thought that like Castle Base was gonna be Sword Base. I was like,
No, they're
oh
two
no, they're
separate
just. I
bases.
know that's so
At
fun.
the
It's
at the end of in the game, the fall Halo Reach or whatever, when June goes like fucks off and escorts Halsey to another place, he escorts her to Castle Base, is where he's taking her.
okay. Yeah.
How does he get off the planet? I don't fucking know. No, but no, neither does nobody. Neither does
I mean,
anybody
to be
else.
fair, it's like it's. I don't think it was ever explained. I mean, fuck, it's probably explained in First Strike how the rest of the Spartan twos survived the Fall of Reach.
Yeah, but not June. June's never given any explanation for how he survived. The only
Mm.
explanation I could think of is that he somehow found like a ship to get off the planet before the Covenant destroyed all the ships in orbit, which
Or
is
he was
okay.
or he probably was. Yeah, I don't
He
know.
wasn't
It's
rescued by Master Chief because he's a Spartan 3, and their Spartan 3s don't show up in First Strike, they show up in Ghosts of Onyx.
yeah.
So,
Um, the Spartan. Yeah, like okay, but the Spartan threes. Yeah, they're officially established in Ghost of Onyx. This is gonna get fucking weird because
yeah.
they say Chief Petty Officer Mendez was gonna train the next group of Spartans, which we never see them in the Fall of Reach. We never see him in
Because
First Strike.
the
But
thing
though
is,
then
the thing is there was a second. so they had the Spartan 2 program, right? And
Yeah.
they divided it into classes. They had the first class was the first 75 children, which was initially going to be 150 and was initially going to be 300. Initially, it was going to be 300 of the first class of Spartan 2s. Then Oni said this is too expensive, so they cut it down to 150 children, and then said once again this is also too expensive, so then they cut it down again to 75, which is where we
Yes.
get the 75 from. Um, then we move, fucking what's it called? Then once the first class of 75 is trained, Halsey's like, oh, and the Oni sees how effective they are. They're like, okay, we'll give you more funding for a second class of Spartan 2s. The problem is, though, is that Halsey has like such specific genetic criteria for the Spartan 2s. Like they have to be genetically perfect and have like certain genetic markers and shit in order for this augmentation technology to actually, quote unquote, work with them.
Which
And
even then
so,
it's not. It doesn't even work all the time.
yeah, and that's the problem. It doesn't even work all the time. And all this shit is laid out in Ghosts of Onyx when Ackerson is going over the problems with the Spartan 2 program. So she spends like years searching for the second class of Spartans until eventually Oni is basically tired and saying, what's the point if we're going to have to wait a decade for 30 Spartans to be trained? This is too slow. And so they end up canceling the second class of Spartan 2s, and they take CPO Mendez, who was going to train that second class, and instead they send him over to the Spartan 3 program to go work with Kurt, train them instead.
Mm-hmm.
Because I know you've
Yeah.
never read. I know you've never read Ghosts of Onyx, and that's all covered in this. They're
Yeah.
all
All
covered
right.
in that.
Which we'll get to that when we do. Which yeah. Yes. So thing about yeah, which makes sense. I can kind of see that, like Halsey is just like being very specific and being very needy, and the Oni is just like fuck off. It's like forget this. Like just come on. Like we just need Spartans. I don't care. Like they don't have to be the best. Just we need them. Like and then just like decide it's like yeah, we're gonna get somebody else to do it because you're taking too long. uh very very Halsey. Which honestly the genetic markers, I'm wondering if that like those genetic markers, if like somehow is what like a retcon, like through a bunch of retcons and through a bunch of like well actuallys eventually became the Gene song. I'm wondering or if that's the case.
Maybe because she said she was looking for specific markers, and then on top of that or whatever, it's like fucking gay ass librarians like, oh yeah, the gene song I implanted in you led to the specific moment. It led to the freaking Spartans or whatever, and you're just like, what the
I'm
fuck are you talking
confused.
about? Yeah, I'm confused. What are you talking
You're
about?
high. Yeah. On something. On fucking Forerunner drugs. Speaking of Forerunner drugs, that's an whole other can of worms. That basically, like the flood. I love this. I love how the origin of the flood. They basically start out. It's like the dust, like that the precursors turn themselves into. That's basically the dust. Like they're just like, yeah, let's just feed it to our dogs. Like, why? It's like I don't know.
Well, the humans say that. Let's feed it to our dogs because it makes
Yeah,
them more docile and easier to
yeah.
domesticate or something.
It was just hilarious.
Yeah. Anyway, though, a couple scenes I like in the book for me. One of them is definitely the gym fight, and then the demonstration we get in the titanium mines, both of which I think showcases the Spartan 2's abilities, even without the Mjolnir armor, pretty spectacularly. I like both of those moments. I like the keys loop, like you said. I like getting the perspective. Like I like switching over to Corporal Harland and seeing from the Marines' perspective, like what it's like on the ground. Because up until that point, we've only gotten either an orbital perspective or we've gotten the perspective of the Spartans in terms of like how scary the Covenant are. We've never
Mhm.
seen like your normal, like everyday Marines perspective. And so we see his perspective, and it's like, oh, hey, in reality, you get hit with one, there's hundreds, thousands of grunts all shooting hundreds of thousands of needler rounds at you. And if you get hit with a single one of them, it's going to lodge in your stomach, explode, and then you're just dead or about to die. So, you know, you can't dodge that shit. You can't fucking have your armor, deflect the needler round. You're just fucking dead. You're
Yeah.
toast. And so
Uh,
it's fucking scary. like
The
from your
other
average
thing
human's
about like
perspective.
the Covenant that I think is interesting is, well, yeah, like that's the thing though, and that's against grunts and jackals, like the squishy cannon fodder. That's not even like covering like the big scary elites
Yeah,
and the
elites and Jiro Hane aren't even mentioned. In fact, elites don't even show up until the space station battle, like in the last third of the book. And fucking John almost gets. This is it's a weird thing because this happens in a later book too. I call it the new enemy syndrome. The first time that the Spartans or John meets a new type of covenant or a new enemy, they almost end up getting killed by it. Even if later on in the later Halo games they will go on to slaughter hundreds, if not thousands, of elites, the first time he meets an elite, he will almost get killed by it. This
or-
happens with the hunters. This happens with the jackals, and Sam dies from the jackals. This
oh
happens with the Jirohane in First Strike, where a Jirohane almost rips Chief's head off. And I think it happens in one of the later books too. I can't remember which species it was, but I just find it amusing. I think it does that to try to establish like what type of threat these opponents, like like what they present, and then also how a lack of an idea of what you're fighting can hamper you. Because, like I said, the Spartans, they're not all about pure brute strength. They're about like outthinking your enemy and tactics and all that shit.
they're
And you can,
basically the opposite of the Astartes.
yeah, and you can't really outguile your enemy or outplan them if you don't know a single thing about your enemy.
Yeah.
So, but
It's through
yeah,
trial. It almost is kind of like how the games work, where you
through
like,
trial and error.
yes, where you basically will play the game and it's like, I think I'm just gonna use my assault rifle, run around, and it's like, oh, I died. Well, why did I die? And it's like, okay, this next time I'm like, oh, well, if I throw the grenade, if I use the frag grenade, I can destroy I can like destroy like a squad of jackals, or I can shoot their hand with the pistol. And it's like, oh,
Hmm.
but why is my pistol like such garbage against the elites? Oh, it's because like I need to use a plasma weapon to destroy their shields, and then I
Yeah,
can use the pistol, or I could like melee attack them, or I can
or you-
throw a grenade.
and it doesn't have to be necessarily through trial and error. It's you can infer from shit too. Like, okay, hey, the plasma pistol EMP works to take out the elite shields. Huh? The jackals have a shield too. I wonder if it'll work to take out their shield. And sure enough, it does.
Yeah,
So, yeah.
yeah, that is another true thing, is that like you do kind of think, ah, I wonder it's like this thing, or it's like, oh man, the sniper rifle has been pretty effective. It's like I'm gonna try using it against the flood. It's like, oh, except it doesn't fucking work for some reason. I always thought
Yeah.
that was hilarious, considering the fact, like, considering like the sniper rifle is designed to shoot anti-tank bullets,
100,
and
not 100, 14.5 millimeter armor piercing rounds,
the
which is the same as an
armor-piercing,
anti-tank.
fin-stabilizing Discardi Sable rounds.
Yeah,
Like,
it's the same rounds as the fucking that giant anti-Soviet anti-tank gun in World War II.
yeah, it's the Soviet anti-tank gun bullets combined with the fact that the actual projectile itself is like a scaled down version of what a tank would shoot. So it
Basically.
really is an anti-tank rifle,
Yep.
because it basically is fuck you and anything standing behind you. um, is there any other things? Okay, but I guess, is there anything else you would like to say about the Fall of Reach?
Um, I guess I'll just talk about. I guess we can just talk about what we liked and what we didn't like, because we talked
Mm,
about what got fucking retconned in the
yeah.
book or whatever. Is the Covenant invasion of Reach is basically the only major thing that got retconned.
Yes.
And all the events surrounding that. But in terms of what I like about the book, I think it does a good job at giving character to like it gives a good job at giving character to John, but at the same time not giving him like not over characterizing him to the point where like the audience can't really identify or be like a self insert with him. Like you can still read the book, play Halo CE, and then still kind of have that self insert feeling of being the Master Chief or whatever.
Because
Um,
the way that Chief thinks is very like very video gamey. He thinks like, ah, yes, there is problem. How do I solve problem?
he
Like,
thinks he thinks analytically. He thinks analytically. He thinks tactically. There's not a lot of emotion or feelings that he puts. There's no emotion or feelings really he puts in his actions. He thinks about what is best strategically and tactically, and then everything else comes second,
Mm-hmm.
basically. Um, which, yeah, I guess you could call it very video gamey. But yeah, it does a good job of characterizing the chief. All the fight scenes in the book, I think, are really well done. They're just like, because I know fight scenes are probably one of the toughest things you can do in a book or in a novel, because you have to do them very carefully, because either they're really good or they're really boring and shitty and you don't want to read them. Halo Reach
Yeah,
does it really good. It puts just enough detail in there to let you imagine what is happening while not over describing everything that is happening to the point of
yeah.
boring.
It
So she
basically it basically describes like these are the key factors, these are the things that are important, and these are the things that you need to pay attention to, and everything else is just kind of noise.
Yeah, like for example, take the fight scene where Chief is testing the Mark V, where that Sparrowhawk launches the missile at him or whatever. It doesn't have to describe exactly what the missile looks like, or what type of explosive warhead the missile has, or like fucking what direction the Sparrowhawk. Like you don't. That's superfluous. You don't need to know that. All you need to know is missile bad, missile hit Chief, Chief deflect missile, and then
Yeah.
fucking enough detail so your mind can imagine that, and that's all you need, really.
Yeah.
Um,
I kind of that's kind of how I mean with like that's kind of how it should be with like a book. I mean with like a film script it's like more important that you have more detail cuz you need to make sure that everything is correct and
well,
that
yeah,
it
you
looks
actually have to. A book is very different than a movie, because with a book, most of what you're doing is imagining how it's playing out in your mind, and you just need to give your reader enough detail so they can imagine it. With a movie, everything is right there on the screen. You can't imagine it; it's right there.
yeah.
So
So yeah, you kind of have to think of like every detail ahead of time when you have to write a film, which come to think of it, I think that's why you could tell like when something was meant to be a movie but they didn't have the budget so they just write a book is when like things are just way too descriptive.
yes,
And I fucking hate how in creative writing class they teach you like when writing they teach you like be super descriptive about everything. No, be as descriptive as you need to be.
as you need to be. Yeah.
Do not no more, no less. Because if you do less, then you're gonna be like your audience is confused. If you do more, then your audience is gonna be bored.
Yes. And they're not going to be able to imagine it for themselves. Like, if you really want, for example, if you really want your character, or if you want your audience to visualize a character in a certain way because how that character looks is important to the story, excuse me, then you can go ahead and put a little more detail in describing them, so you can form like a specific picture,
Hmm.
of how that character looks. But if how they look isn't important to the story, then don't fucking bother going and putting all this information into it.
Yeah, and it's funny because even like when like even when like the Fall of Reach, whenever like they describe the weapon, like them firing their assault rifles in short control bursts, my brain will just automatically replace the MA5B that they're supposed to have with the BR-55 because to me that just makes more sense if they're firing like a short control burst that they would
Mm,
have like because that's like I mean obviously they didn't intend for the battle rifle to exist and so I kind of just like just so in my brain it has a little bit more continuity with like the other with the Halo lore in general. I just was like okay there's some BR-55s mixed in with the MA5B even though that's like not like what the book says.
yeah.
Say
Um,
I kind of have to do the same thing with like how I think in the Flood like they specifically describe the ODSTs as wearing the standard marine armor. But like my brain is like the ODSTs wear the black armor, so that's what they're wearing in my head.
mhm.
They just it just looks like because it's so funny because I just imagine like everything like looking like Halo Combat Evolved shitty graphics in like when I read the Flood. Like I don't get to imagine what it would be like in like nice I mean I could do that, but it's just like I was like oh yeah everything is like the Combat Evolved like shitty polygon graphics.
Fair enough.
And so I
Um,
imagine the ODSTs having the Halo 2 armor like that like the model that they had like just in Combat Evolved's engine. Kind of, yeah. What you were saying?
Anyway, those are the things I like about it. The only thing, I guess it'd be easier to say what I don't like because it's only a couple things. The only thing I the only thing I don't like about the book really is, and I know we were just going over not giving your audience like too much detail and stuff, but I don't think the book really gives you a good enough perspective of your average soldier's like viewpoint of the war. The only time we get your average soldier's viewpoint is with Corporal Harland, and that's all good and stuff. But after that, we don't really get your average person's like viewpoint,
We
of how the
kind of
Covenant act.
kind of get it as well with Ensign Level, like that one scene we see of him, like, and he's like
It's
has his
it's
boring desk
it's like
job where,
it's like one scene though. That's not
yeah,
really.
I don't know, but like basically where he's like, oh yeah, like I'm gonna fight the Covenant, and it's gonna be great, and it's like, no, it actually fucking sucks. Like UNSC propaganda lied.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's really my only main complaint about it. In terms of other complaints, that's mostly due to the stuff that later books and games and shit retcon a bunch of shit into it, but that's not the book's fault. So
Yeah. It's not uh yeah, anyway, so
there any final thoughts you wanna
let's
give?
see.
Because
I guess the idea I think this is the question that we are going to ask. I mean, we basically already answered it, but this is the kind of like final like thing of the question of, because these books, I think like a lot of like these Halo lore YouTubers will kind of like make it seem like, these books are nothing more than like a bunch of collections of facts about Halo that like aren't necessarily like that, like it's like, oh, like the facts about the lore and about like why this thing is the way it is. I feel like especially with like the Flood trilogy, which is why I'm like afraid of reading the Flood trilogy, is that it's going to be fucking miserable because of just how um convoluted and like how much lore stuff there is in the Flood trilogy. But the question I want to ask at the end of like every one of these episodes is, was this book a good piece of literature by itself?
I would say yes, because this is literally the first book like in the Halo universe. It sets pretty much everything up.
Yes.
Like out of if you're ever gonna read a Halo book, I'd recommend this one.
It definitely does. For me, I feel like, in fact, you mentioned actually funny thing you mentioned earlier. I think that the fall of Reach does something that I don't feel like the games do a good job of, with
Hmm.
maybe the exception of Halo Reach, the game, is that they don't make the Covenant seem like this, like as like threatening. Because it's like you're a guy in green power armor and you punch elites in the face with your pistol. Like you just, it's like, it's just, I mean, like, it kind of is a little bit hard to make enemies seem threatening in a game without them like, or seeing like overpowering, like threatening, without them coming off as annoying, like the sniper
Hmm.
jackals or the rocket launcher flood or just the flood in general in the library, or basically any like enemy in a video game that you just dread fighting. You dread fighting because you're just like, oh, for fuck's sake, not this guy. I hate, like, you're kind of irritated and you're not having fun when you
Hmm.
dread fighting a specific enemy in a video game. Where in like a book, I think it's easier to capture like the kind of primal fear, or like the kind of like of the uh sir, how fucked up are we? Yes. Like that kind of like kind of just like this mentality of, yeah, we're screwed. Like against the like this is gonna suck. Like, but in a kind of like more in a way that feels narratively connected. I don't know, because like, yeah, the Covenant, I guess, are threatening, depending like, how threatening the Covenant are in the Halo games is dependent on what difficulty you're playing.
Yeah.
Really, if like but yeah, no, it does like kind of give you the like just how like inferior like the UNSC technology and how like inferior numbers that like the UNS it just kind of does highlight really I think how much of a disadvantage the UNSC is in this war,
Mm-hmm.
which yeah, like I said, the games like can't really do that because it's about you punching things with a gun and shooting things and driving around a warthog and running things over. It's a video game. You do, you do video game stuff. But yeah, I think but yes, to answer my own question earlier, I would say that yes, this is a good piece of literature. I think that you mentioned like I think that Captain Keyes and like really it's like I think the fact that they fleshed out his character like that's the funny thing. I think that okay, just generally the things I liked is just like you mentioned Master Chief. I liked how they fleshed out Captain Keyes and Cortana and
Mm-hmm.
how this book also even like flesh is like you're kind of like your flesh it fleshes out Dr. Halsey as well a little bit and you kind of like because you don't really see her that much in the games and when you kind of do see her she's kind of like nagging and she's kind of like a bitch and she's kind of like like you guys are incompetent, let me do things the way I want, which is that is a small part of Dr. Halsey's character of wanting to have control over things and liking to do things exactly the way she wants to do them.
Mm-hmm.
But like I said, that's just a small part of her character and the bigger like what am I trying to say? I actually that's another. I remembered. I just remembered another scene that I really liked. I liked the scene where where Cortana is basically picking which Spartan she wants, and she picks John. Uh, like they both kind of like where Cortana and Halsey are basically like in perfect sync in terms of like what they're thinking
Mm-hmm.
because they have the same personality because Joel Cortana is a artificial intelligence like copy of Halsey because she's literally made from Halsey's cloned brain,
Yeah.
which I don't know, to me that whole scene is just kind of like it's kind of wholesome and it really does make like kind of make me feel nostalgic for Halo 3 and the story of Halo 3. Which it's so funny because like I think there are a few lines that are a callback to Halo 3 or that Halo 3 calls back to like in Halo 3 she's like could you watch me die, could you like sacrifice myself like
That's all. That's all lines said in the Fall
yeah
of Reach, just changed
yeah
slightly. Yeah.
yeah which really does even more create confusion that the retcons than Halo Reach that they in Halo 3. Halo is just a weird franchise to follow.
Yeah. It's an understatement.
Yeah. I mean, to be fair, like any long existing franchise like this is going to have discrepancies, and there are going to be. Wait, how does this fit together? And it does. I feel I'm not sure like what franchise I'm going to name this after, but I believe that there is a law in nature that the longer your franchise exists, the more likely you are to either repeat or contradict what has already been established.
Mm-hmm.
And again, I'm not sure like what.
Because it's like the more rules you have to follow, the more previous stuff that is like exists, the more careful you have to be about making sure you don't go against previously established stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, which it's already bad. I would argue that repeating it, like having a repeat of something that already exists, is worse than saying, "Well, fuck it, we're just gonna ignore something that had previously happened." Actually, though they're both bad, they're just bad for different reasons. Like a repeat, a basically like oh well we're like, basically a retelling is what I'll call it
Mm-hmm.
is bad because nothing interesting happens, so you're bored. But I think a deliberate fuck you, we're changing things is bad, and because that will make you like pissed off because
Mm-hmm.
all of your investment now means nothing because It basically is. It's basically saying, "Hey, look, this isn't real. Like, guys, look, I'm behind the curtain. It's a puppet show. Isn't that funny? Like that. Like, I've I feel like the later Star Wars movies kind of do that a lot, where it's
Oh
basically,
yeah.
yeah, especially The Last Jedi. It's like, oh, look, I'm Ryan Johnson. I'm the puppet master. Isn't this fun? No, it's not fun, Ryan Johnson. Fuck off. Anyway, is there anything else you'd like to say before we end this?
Nope, not really, and I'll have to be getting to work soon too. So.
All right, that works out. So, thank you for those of you who did watch. I did see some people in the chat, although that they appeared to be bots, so I kind of had to put them in timeout. But hey, for anybody watching the replay of this, yes, and for people who did watch this live, thank you for watching. Looking forward to doing this next month with Halo: The Flood. That should be fun. Probably start reading that as soon as we're done. But anyway, yes, thank you. Also, this won't be relevant in the replay, but later tonight, I'm also going to be streaming the movie Die Hard and the movie Ocean's 11 on the Discord. So, and once again, that's in the description below, so you can join that. And yeah, hopefully, we'll have a good time. But thank you all for watching. Until next time, signing out.